Hello everyone, and welcome back to the fading flame that is of the Proving Grounds within Dark Souls 3, the Fire Fades edition. So, Dark Souls 3, came out several years ago, and it had two DLCs that I never got around to playing for quite a while. I waited for a physical version with the two DLCs that came out, got on a bit of a discount and just been on the shelf for a while, and we went through those slowly and then a bit quickly because I wanted to get them done before Elden Ring. So here we are with the two DLCs done in a completion of the full experience of Dark Souls 3 now, several years later after my original playthrough back when the game first came out. Now the two DLCs complement each other. The story is actually interwoven, so it is a bit strange on the fact that the two DLCs are sold separately. But there is an option to get them together at a discount, but that is one thing that I found a bit odd. Now, the two DLCs themselves are pretty drastically different from each other, even though those stories are interwoven at certain parts of that. So the first one, the Painted World. The Painted World is an area that was in the original Dark Souls, and we get to return to a very eerie and familiar setting while exploring more of the Painted World. The Painted World's DLC begins when you meet a new NPC at the cathedral in the base game, and you can take his extension of an offer and be drawn into the Painted World, allowing you to thus explore it. Now, while you can get early access to the Painted World, I can tell you it will likely hand you your fucking ass if you're at the normal level that you would be at the cathedral. I poked my head into it multiple times through my Wii playthrough, because every Souls game, I've always replayed the entire experience along with the new DLC that came out. I did it for the original Dark Souls, I did it with Dark Souls 2, and we've done it with Dark Souls 3 here. And I also done it with Bloodborne, of course, as well. I replayed the whole base game with the DLC to enhance the experience of it, Get to experience all the new mechanics and changes that have happened from the original launch of the game, because they also do balance changes and stuff too, So I poked my head in now during the game, and over time slowly worked my way into the Painted World. The Painted World, as interesting of a area it is, being the second time there's been a snow-covered area. If you're very familiar with FromSoft's developed games of the Soul series, you would know that there was another snow area that was being developed but was canned from Demon Souls, the Land of the Giants, which never saw release, and was only ever really discovered through hacking the game. But the first snow area was in Dark Souls 2's DLC, which introduced some interesting elements, especially a big open area that's a giant snowstorm, which is just a hellscape to travel through. Now, luckily, you won't have that kind of trouble traveling through the Painted World in Dark Souls 3, but you do have a few of its own hazards of sight still in certain parts, along with lots of cliff sides and shit. Overall, though, with the Painted World's DLC, you're getting only one additional overall area, where the second one, the Wing City, actually has two main hubbed areas of it. But what's interesting about the Painted World is really when it ultimately look at the package, you only get two bosses, and one of them's a side boss. You're ultimately working to unlock the end boss of the DLC. And believe me, it's a hell of a boss considering there's only two bosses. It's a hell of a boss, but we'll get into that kind of shit when we talk about the story, spoils, and a little bit of my opinion on what the DLC's story brings to the overall story. And I do want to talk a bit about that. Of course, along with that, you get new weapons, equipment, item, There's several new NPCs, armor, spells, and that, of course, you also get with the DLC, along with new lore and such. Considering there's only 2 bosses, it's a pretty decent sized area. It has quite a few number of bonfires and a lot of places to explore. Both completely new places and familiar places for those who've played the original Dark Souls 1, if you're willing to seek out secrets. But ultimately, it is a challenging area. Like, the 2 DLCs are both way harder than the fucking base game, in my opinion. But it was very satisfying, considering it even, just like I said, has only 2 bosses. It was very exciting and satisfying to explore through the area. It had lots of traps and deadly pathways to find many, many interesting things throughout the area. Now, as I said, the 2 DLCs are interwoven, and event-wise, from how I experienced, the Painted World definitely seems to come first before the events of the Winged City, and then it turns back around to the Painted World to finish. And again, I'll go into that, exactly how that works in spoiler section of that. Overall, though, I really enjoyed the Painted World. It's very satisfying, and you will have lots to explore. You can co-op and all the usual shenanigans in the base game and that. So, it's always a joy. Now, the Winged City DLC is... I feel like its implication of how you enter it was a little lazy. There's 2 ways to go into it. Either after... There's a bonfire that spawns where the final boss fight in the Painted World is that will take you there, which is the only way to get there early. So you have to beat the Painted World and you can go there early. Or you have to wait until the end of the game where you're going to the first bonfire, which is the final area of the base game, which has a new bonfire that takes you to the Drag Heap, which is that giant mess of conglomerated mess of shit you see in the background of the area. So... and this area is going to have a lot of spoilers, so if you haven't played the base game and you'll find that very important, I would definitely be cautionary here, because it's kind of hard to avoid spoilers. So the Drag Heap is a mess of past areas from the Soul series, and you can see a lot of interesting structures in it in the final area, but going to the Drag Heap, the Winged City's DLC's first area, gives you a lot more insight in the weird mess of shit that's here. And each area, there's a main kind of hub area, like, not hub, not, wait, there's an, how should I say it? There's a slice of each Dark Souls in the Drag Heap. Of course, you have the castle of the Twin Princes being represented in the early stages of the Drag Heap. If you're very familiar with it, you will actually find some of the beginning structure very familiar of both the beginning and end areas. But then later you will actually go to Orphan Peak from Dark Souls 2, which is a very interesting choice, which I will talk about in the spoilers section, because I have a lot of interesting ideas. I've always had my own theories on how Dark Souls 2 fits in the in Dark Souls timeline overall. But it's very interesting to me they used Orphan Peak to represent 2 in the Drag Heap. And you're gonna have a lot of flashbacks to nightmare fuel shit there. Oh, pyromancing. And then you also get to see what is remnants of Firelink Shrine. At first I didn't really, like, a part of me kind of thought about that, but I didn't really, like, when you watch when I was playing that area and looked around the area of it, I was a little mainly confused, because it's so big and it's underground. But it is Firelink Shrine when you compare it to Firelink Shrine, and that I guess it just sunk into the ground or something. But Firelink Shrine from the original Dark Souls is also represented in the Dreg Heap. And then after the Dreg Heap, you get to go to the Wing City, which slowly opens up all the secrets and insanity of a conspiracy, lies, deceit, and a partnership no one ever saw coming until this game came out. Or I should say this DLC. So, the Wing City is a whole new area. It is not destroyed structures of past areas. And the Wing City introduces essentially 4 bosses, which one is a side boss. The other 3 are mandatory to fight. One is of the Dreg Heap, 2 of them are in the Wing City, and, well, the side boss is also in the Wing City, but again, they're a side boss that you don't have to fight, and they're apparently considered one of the hardest bosses in the overall series, so interesting encounter to run into. Now, the Wing City, depending how you interpret and what kind of rabbit hole you go into when it comes to the lore, can lead to lots of different interpretations of the storyline. And I haven't watched any videos of anyone's opinions of the DLC story or lore yet, because I wanted to save it for my own interpretation before I start letting others influence me on that. But again, spoiler section. So, with 4 more bosses, of course, you have new weapons, wings, and gear and spells and stuff. And there's a lot of +3 wings that are introduced in the Winged City. Similar to Dark Souls 2, it introduces the +3 wings of a number of classic wings, giving you upgrades, which can be very useful. There's also a new covenant introduced in the Wing City, which can lead to new rewards as well. I only got to minorly try out the new covenant a little bit, but it's a bit interesting. It's essentially another summon boss type covenant where you get summoned as a boss. So it's kind of like the old monk a little bit. A bit of an interesting take. I think it does work better than the Mirror Knight version of this idea. The Mirror Knight was pretty hard to get summoned as a Mirror Knight, which was a bit of a shame because it was an interesting idea, but it was pretty tough to get summoned as a Mirror Knight. Being it a Covenant in Dark Souls 3, obviously much easier to be queued for today. And it does work a lot like the monk. Apparently, from my understanding, you don't even need to be in the Covenant. You can actually be summoned for it with a sign down, just like the old monk fight was. Because that's exactly how the old monk worked. You put your summon sign down, and you could be summoned by the old monk, as opposed to a player. So, it's... But of course, the Covenant is the easier way to get summoned for it. But I'm assuming the summon sign is there just in case there's nobody to grab that's in the Covenant at the time. A last-ditch effort to get someone, I imagine. And again, similar to the old monk fight, if nobody's available, it will be a NPC, which is apparently just like the old monk version. Pretty easy, apparently, to kick ass. So, if you're having trouble with this particular boss instance, that's always an option, just to switch offline for that. Admittedly, some PvP people can be a bit tough sometimes, so, you know, there's always that as an option. And of course, there are new NPCs and lots of storylines. Very interesting ideas going on in the Wing City that kind of wrap up a lot of speculation. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what the community's ideas and interpretations of a lot of the story is. That. Again, the Wing City is also very fun. It's also very cruel and vicious. There are several incidents of just being horribly trollish and malicious to the player. So, you know, if you're one of those people, it's like, the game needs easy mode. You don't want to do the Wing City. It's going to break you. Break you way bad. There's lots of tricky instances in the Wing City that can be pretty unforgiving. But it is a fun wump through a lot of familiar, interesting flashback areas, and I think even in the Wing City, even though it doesn't have areas directed from previous areas, still draws some nostalgia. Like the Catacomb area really draw a lot of nostalgia from Dark Souls 1's Catacombs, even though it's not the actual same Catacombs. And I think the reason is it's such an ancient city, but again, that goes into story, which, you know, again, save it for the spoil section. The two DLCs don't fundamentally change anything really in the gameplay, other than adding, you know, new spells and gear that you can use in your arsenal, but not like actual drastic new elements. So you don't have to be worried about anything bizarre like that. I mean, the most different thing is just the drag being previous areas messed up and twisted, and the painted world being a snow area, pretty much the most things. So, other than new gear, so a lot of the same things still apply to the base game of it. And again, you know, if you want the rundown of gameplay mechanics in the base game and stuff, I would recommend watching my original review on Dark Souls 3. So, value-wise, what would I value Dark Souls 3's 2 DLCs? I think they are very solid, good value as the two combined, because they are interlaced stories at the end. So I'm going to consider the same, considering though you can get the Season Pass, which gives you both of them cheaper, and of course there's the Faded Edition physically that has the whole game, all three things packaged together physically. Which of course, you know, I always recommend that. But I think the 2 DLCs together are a decent $30 value. They are very enjoyable, and together they offer a nice array of new gear, bosses, areas to explore, and more jolly cooperation, along with invasion stabbies and all that. And the New Covenant, the Wing City, like I said, does offer some extra old monk flashback fun. But believe me, if you're being summoned for it, you better expect a gank squad almost every time. Oh boy. But I think they're all good $30 value. Like, together, they're essentially its own side Dark Souls game. Almost. I mean, it's not a full-fledged thing. Like, for $30, you know, it's... I guess maybe more way I should say is it's more like half of a Dark Souls game. So I think $30 sounds like a good full value price. Which, individually, the DLC sell for $14.99, so they're $15 each. But the Season Pass is $24.99, so you save basically $5 off that. And then, of course, if you go physically, you can get, especially right now, lots of deals, being that the Faded Edition came out long ago. I mean, let's see, it came out... I think it came out in 2016? 17? Somewhere around now? I think it was 17. But you can very easily find the complete edition of the game for like $20 and under, depending on whether you want brand new sealed or used or don't care or the disc only, you know. You can find it very easily, the whole package, fantastic price and everything. And of course, if you don't care about the DLCs, you can get the base game cheaper, obviously, because, you know, like... But the only way I can imagine wanting the base game is if you want to experience what the game was like without all the patches that adjusted spells and things. That's like the only real reason to go back to older versions of the game, honestly. If you want the complete package and you don't even have Dark Souls 3 at all, I definitely recommend the Fire Fades edition. Like I said, easy $20 and under, depending on where you go. You'll likely find it very often between 15 to 20, so Very easy, very cheap, fantastic steal for all the content, everything. It's great. Do recommend, definitely, if you're into the Soul series. Now, spoilers. What I think about the storylines and shit. There's a lot of interesting things to implicate overall. So, you go through the Painted World and you meet this lady that's in a church building in the Painted World. And essentially what you find out in the Painted World, to adjust from what I discovered and interpreted information from Gil, is that they apparently the residents of the Painted World would paint another Painted World and go to that as time goes on, because the Painted World would rot. Well, for some reason, they decided that they didn't want to continue this cycle with the flame and such of doing another Painted World and that, and wanted to just let the Painted World they're currently in just rot. So when you go fight the boss for the Painted World, you introduce fire into the Painted World and allow a new person to paint a new Painted World. But they need ink. They need to see a flame and they need ink, is what you get to find out. By defeating the boss, you allow the painter to see the fire. But they need the ink from the Winged City. Now the other boss, the Champion's Grave Tender and the Grave Tender Great Wolf, or obviously a great nod to Artorias and the Great Wolf from Dark Souls 1. Not quite as awesome or tragically sad, but a very nice nod, and especially since the fight takes place under the original boss room for the Painted World, which is a very nice nod. And honestly, if it wasn't for me helping people in the Painted World a few times, I would have never found out there was a secret way to get on the structure from the original boss room from the Painted World. Because there is a secret way to get up there. It's very easy to miss if you don't look for secret walls. And literally, if it wasn't for me helping someone and seeing there was a fucking doorway there that they had opened all way, they had already found it. I just noticed, I was like, wait a minute, I don't remember finding any other rooms down in that area. And I went back down there and went to around where I thought it was, and boom, the secret wall goes right there. And I was like, damn, I almost missed that. Stuff like that is just always tragic to miss, but the discoverability is just awesome. But after you introduce the fire to all of that, you basically can go to the Winged City. Now, the Painted World, in general, as I said, they keep making a new painted, hence why there's differences to the Painted World. It's more expensive and bigger than the original Painted World because it had been repainted in that. So when you read a lot of items in there about the culture that happened in the Painted World, it continues the same idea that many other creatures have came to the Painted World and have found peace or away from the outer world, as some residents like to refer to it. Now, we will come back to the Painted World story here, because as I said, the end of the two DLCs happens in the Painted World. But we have to go get the ink. So, be it through either the Painted World or the final area of the base game, you go to the Dreg, the horrible mess of buildings and structures that you see in the background of the final area. The initial area is of the Twin Princes Castle, a little bit of the beginning area that you get to go to, and a chunk of the lab area of the end area. And you go from that to, you go from the Dreg Heap, from Lothar Castle, Orphan Peak, to Firelink Shrine through the Dreg Heap. Now, the boss of the Dreg Heap, which you fight at Firelink Shrine, the Demon Prince, is interesting because you actually learn about him from Prince Lothric's gear, because I believe the Elden Brother Asgil talks about defeating a demon prince. So that's interesting that he is at the Dreg Heap, a place that is incorporating things from all of time. So how people interpreted the original ending of the area of the base game is that everything in the universe is fucking falling apart in Dark Souls. So, from Dark Souls 1 to 3, we've been told that time is convoluted and the worlds are, like, crossing over, and that's how, like, you summon people and invade people's worlds. You're literally going to a alternate timeline of your world to someone else's that could have radically different things going on in it versus your version of the world. It's very weird. And that's all breaking down in Dark Souls 3, and the final area is just that final, everything's just falling apart. And everything is being drugged back to the first flame where everything began for all this madness. And I think that's like why things like the Demon Prince is here, and you even find the Dragon Slaying armor in at the Wing City. Actually, it crash lands there, showing that even then stuff is still being dragged over to this time period. And then being pulled here, whether it be from Dark Souls 3 or all the way to Dark Souls 1, all of time is overlapping and fucking collapsing. Now, the reason I found Earthen Peak very interesting choice for this is because, essentially, if you've played Dark Souls 2, or if you ever seen a video showing off, like, behind the scene, out of bounds, things that you may have seen or came to the conclusion that Earthen Peak is really weird, because the next area after Earthen Peak is a giant volcano area, the Iron Heap, where the old Iron King is. Now, you go up an elevator from the top of Earthen Peak to come here that goes straight up. So it makes no sense how you go from a giant windmill in a poison-filled land with an open sky going upward from the top of the windmill to a lava-filled volcano area with a giant castle. People have countlessly never understood how that makes any sense. And that's why I think Earthen Peak being chosen is kind of interesting. Because the world's falling apart, and I think maybe, and this is just me, maybe like basically throwing my own idea here. I don't really have a conclusive thing in the game that really backs this up at all. So keep that in mind. This is literally my own interpretation. But I find it interesting they choose Earthen Peak because maybe that was the reason to kind of explain why that was like that. Because you're going through these areas that are all interconnected, overlaying, and all running in a heap. Dark Souls 2 storyline, a lot of people argue whether it's canon, non-canon, how it's even involved in the overall storyline. I've always interpreted Dark Souls 2's storyline to be a quote-unquote alternate timeline of events. How I like to think of it is, I think
Dark Souls 2
timeline is where the world got shrouded in darkness for a cycle, and it went down a path of unknowns and forgetfulness of many past cultures and lands and things. While Dark Souls 3 continued in an age where the fire kept getting lit more. Now, I have no doubt in Dark Souls 2's universe that it had been likely lit before as well, but I think it went down a more of a path where it didn't get lit as much or very little, which led to a decline in knowledge, information, and remembrance of things in it. And in a way, you could argue Dark Souls 2 itself was maybe the early stages of its own timeline collapsing in a similar way to how Dark Souls 3 is, but in a very early stage of it. Now again, like I said, this is just all my own speculation, so perhaps the weird disconnect between Earthen Peak and the old Iron King's area is, in fact, a strange disconnect of the world itself. But hey, again, that's just me kind of throwing in weird shit now. The more interesting thing, of course, is the Winged City, which freaking blew so many theories and shit out of the fucking water. It just... like, it was crazy what kind of crazy shit you find there. So, the Winged City, from how I interpreted from items in that, and the setting, like, there's literally a interesting statue you can find of Gwyn putting a crown on a very hollowed, mummified looking corpse that, you know, most hollows take the kind of look of. My interpretation, and of course there's item descriptions to back it up, like the winged armor. Basically, the Winged City is where the pygmies live. The legend pygmy. But you find out there's not just a pygmy, there are pygmies. They will, like a kind of an organization or that. A group or identification. But the Winged City is where the pygmies live. And they essentially helped Gwyn do the war against the dragons and shit. They were there, they were a part of it. But they're never mentioned ever in any of the lore or anything. Because just like his son, they were stricken from history. Gwyn was given the power to write history, and so he did. But you might ask, wait, but wasn't Gwyn afraid of the dark? Well, I think what's interesting is, you know, everyone thought that, you know, Gwyn fucking either hunted down the pygmies or fucking just never could find them or something, but always tried to, like, forgo any of their teachings and shit and stuff. But it's interesting, the Winged City essentially introduces the idea that Gwyn went with the keep your enemies closer kind of logic. Like, he befriended, they worked together to end the age of dragons, they rose in power, and it's like, oh, here's your own gigantic city, you can live, and, like, kings and shit and that. But essentially, they were prisoners, though, in a way. Like, they were secretly prisoners in the city of paradise for themselves. And they were, well, set there to rot at the edge of the world forever, essentially. To never be known or discovered by man. So his age of fire can continue to burn. It's very interesting that, but the NPC you meet that lets you go into the painted world guides you through the drag heap in the Winged City, because he is trying to get the ink for the painter in the painted world. Essentially, you go through, you find a lot of things about Gwyn, the Great Age of Fire and shit. There's all kinds of things that lead to... I could see many different interpretations on how people could take the story overall. But what's interesting is at the end, what all this place is guarding is some goal with like an egg thing of that. And you get warped to, like, literally the end of the world. Like, everything is just gone. And the pygmies are here. This is where the pygmies are. Just literally the end of time. Now, I don't know exactly if this is supposed to interpret the idea that Gwyn himself knew of the kind of loose connection of time being convoluted or anything. Like, did he seal the pygmies basically at the end of the world so they could never interact with anything? I'm not exactly sure. It's, again, like I said, there's a lot of different ways you could interpret it. Did you fast travel to the end of the world? Or did you just blink an eye because of your actions at the Winged City, and this is your actions? Like, this wasn't necessarily originally what happened, but because of what you did, it became the new reality in a Back to the Future kind of way. Like, I don't know, personally. Leaves a lot of subjective room, but either way, you get teleported to an area where almost everything is just fucking dust almost. There's very little of anything left anymore. And here, at what seems to be the end of everything, the pygmies, Slave Knight, Gal, and you are all here. The Slave Knight has slain all the pygmies and I guess ate them. Like, my interpretation of the cutscene that with the final boss of the Winged City is that he essentially ate the pygmies so he could take their dark souls and basically turn it into a liquid by becoming his blood. Because when you kill him, you get the dark soul in a blood-like form, so the painter can use it as paint. So it's a very weird encounter, but I guess the fact that he led you through all this, he hoped that you would slay him because you only get to meet him a little, but he generally seems to want to make a better world, and I think at the cost of his own life. I think the Dark Soul was too much for him. He couldn't control it. He became a crazed beast, and he only acts in the final fight. He really does. And I think that was his idea, that to have you hopefully take his blood, which now contains the Dark Soul. This thing that has always been a mysterious thing in the background of all the games to the painter. Now, at this point, you can go back to the painted world, go to the church, and give it to the painter, which she'll ask you your name. I gave her my name, and she will paint a new world. Now, you don't get to see the end results of this painting or anything, but she will paint this world, and it will be a dark, calm, safe place for everyone. And that is how, she says it and such. And that's the end of the DLC, and then you can just do the base game ending and go into New Game Plus with that, or just stick around in whatever playthrough you're in. That it doesn't get a big CG ending or anything of that. That's just the end of the DLC storyline, and it kind of leaves itself still disconnected from the base game having an ending. But I feel like so what's the message here? What is the DLCs trying to tell us about the storyline? I think there's two things to take away from the DLC and the storyline itself. There's its in-game universe meaning, and I feel like there's an out-of-game metaphor, a representation of what it is referring to. So Miyazaki has said multiple times he doesn't want to end his games to end up in some kind of situation like how Call of Duty, Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, sequel after sequel after sequel, over and over, milking it dry to the everlast drop and beyond, and that. He doesn't want to do that with his games. He wants to move on to new ideas. His stories he likes to make for users to interpret and theorize and that, not continuously making and expand more and more and more on it endlessly forever. I think in a way, kind of like how Danganronpa V3's ending is, and I'm not going to talk about the actual ending of V3, but I'm just mentioning it. I think it overall was to try and express an idea that it's a repeating cycle. There is never going to really be a 100% conclusion to Dark Souls. It is a cycle of a world ending and being reborn over and over again. And I mean, that's what people have always interpreted from Dark Souls 1 to 2 to 3's base ending, that it's just a cycle that's never ending. Something will rise up and continue a new cycle of the world until that falls and begins a new cycle of culture. But I think the ending that happens in the painted world, and again, this is just me, but I think it's representing, the painter represents FromSoft, and the painting represents Elden Ring. And the fact that they use the Dark Soul as ink represents taking the mechanics and things that they have learned over the years with Dark Souls and paint a new world that is Elden Ring. A new game with new ideas and new things by using the quote-unquote essence of Dark Souls, the Dark Soul. That's kind of like the double meaning thing I kind of take from the ending of The Painted World. But again, that's just me. That's just me. Maybe I'm just looking into things with a weird kind of lens or something. Perhaps, maybe. Yeah. But I that's kind of how I see it. Like, I find it interesting. You literally get the Dark Soul to be used as ink for a painting of that. Which, that can bring, if that ends up having anything to do with Elden Ring's storyline, would bring very weird implications of an overall Souls universe kind of thing. Because people have made interesting theories on how the games could be interlinked together, even though Miyazaki has said that Demons, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls all own their own universes that are not connected to each other. But I'm just saying, it could mean some really weird implications if there's anything in Elden Ring's storyline that even remotely hints to anything about the Painted World. It could lead to some really interesting implications. But overall, though, I really did enjoy the 2 DLCs. It was nice revisiting Dark Souls 3 again for these, and it was definitely nice to do it before Elden Ring. Because of some of the control changes in Elden Ring, it took me a while to get used to the few slight differences to its control scheme, and I definitely would imagine going back to an older game in the Souls franchise will likely have the same effect, where it might likely be a little tricky to get unused to it. But I definitely do think it's worth checking out the Faded Edition or getting all 3, the base and the 2 DLCs. It's a worthwhile game to still experience, and I definitely do recommend doing it after you play Dark Souls 1 and 2. I think, especially with the DLCs, I think it's a nice conclusion to the overall trilogy of the game. So, I definitely recommend playing them in order, but it's not necessary, but I do recommend experiencing that way, because I think the 2 DLCs overall ending kinda just has a nostalgic reward to playing all 3 of them, if you get what I mean. You get my draw on that. But at the end of the day, I think it's worth experiencing these 2 DLCs, whether it be now or way in the future, depending on your time. Because, if you're anything like me, you might be short on time. It's hard to play a lot of games. But those are my thoughts on the 2 DLCs for Dark Souls 3. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you feel like you learned anything interesting in this, feel free to leave a like. And if you feel like you learned nothing at all, feel free to leave a dislike. Feel free. Until next time, peace out. Is everyone gone? Okay, I got one more thing. I'm sorry for the fake ending. I know some of you might be like, wait a minute, why is there dead air for a second? I do want to talk about one more spoiler, and I wanted to save it for this part, make it literally its own spoiler, because I thought it was just such a unique treat for Souls players specifically. So, massive spoilers. For one particular character. Not the overall story, but a character. And if you played The Winged City, you probably know who I'm going to talk about. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Patches. Patches the Unbreakable. Returning from Dark Souls 1, Patches returns again. Well, I also returning from Bloodborne. Patches have been in Demon, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, and Bloodborne prior to Dark Souls 3's appearance. He wasn't in 2 because Miyazaki wasn't in the lead of it. And, of course, Patches returns in Elden Ring, which just continues his trend of being a landmark character for the franchise of it. But Patches' appearance in Dark Souls 3 was an interesting one, and it continues to be a thing even in the DLC, as a new NPC in the Winged City is an amnesiac of Patches. Patches lived to see the end of the world of Dark Souls. It's very interesting, considering his name being the Unbreakable in Dark Souls 3. A character that continued to outlast kingdoms, cultures, and time, that continuously keeps cycling in that. But here, in the Winged City, he's finally meeting his match. He's forgetting who he was, and he's falling apart. But you can save Patches. And of course, you get rewarded in a classic Patches fashion of getting kicked. But his dialogue's interesting, and the place he kicks you is interesting, because essentially he's helping you move forward, and he will help you with the second to last boss, which shows that he kept his word in a way, where he promises before he got his memory back that he will always treasure you as a friend for your help. It's interesting. I almost kind of wish Patches was a summon for the very final fight, but Patches isn't nowhere to be found in this ash-filled version of the world, showing that maybe Patches may not have been able to make it that far, maybe, but considering he made it to the Drag, it's interesting, considering pretty much the only people that have made it this far, because what's interesting about the Slave Knight armor set is the Slave Knights appear to have existed since the Age of File's conception. Like, it seems from how you interpret it, they may have existed since the Age of Gwen. So, meaning they essentially existed during and after the Age of File. And this guy, the Slave Knight gal, has also existed almost pretty much through the entire storylines of the Dark Souls universe. So, these two people made it to the end of the world, essentially, along with you. So, it's just interesting how they gave Patches a little extra story in the Winged City, just showing how tough to the end he was, and how you, the player, could either help him or likely spell his demise in it. But I just kind of want that to be its own thing, because, trusty Patches, I think that was a special treat for anyone who's into Souls, and I don't want to initially ruin that even for people who are willing to sit through some of the story spoilers. I think that's a nice treat for people, because, different people will, how should I say, bear with Patches' horrible traps and allow him to live, and other people will just immediately kill him because they just hate him. And I think the way you interact with the Amnesiac in the Winged City will ultimately play on your morals on how you've always interacted with Patches during at least your first playthroughs. So, but I thought that was a nice treat. And I'm still looking forward to seeing how I get to interact with Patches in Elden Ring. I've already ran into him a few times, so hopefully continues a nice trend of being the little troll swat he is. The unbreakable Patches. Anyway, for those who have ended their Age of Ash and have sought an end, I honor you as a now tarnished. Go and fix the Elden Ring and become the next Elden Lord. Until next time, here at the Proving Grounds, I'll see you, hopefully, with the Elden Ring restored. Take it easy.